Good evening and welcome to Leaders Debate Part 2 here at the ACT Australian Units. I am Francis Leach.
I am Van Badham. I'm not Peter Credlin, and this is not Chris Kenny.
But it might be Ron Burgundy if you check out the brown suit. I told you I had a brown suit. I thought I'd bring the brown downtown today.
I appreciate that, and I just seem to have an infinite collection of red dresses. I would like to make preemptive apologies to the people of San Diego, just in case he goes full Ron Burgundy tonight.
Just lacking the mustache. Are we looking forward to tonight? We kind of are in a perverse kind of way because the
last debate was such a circus. I mean, it had everything: screaming, more screaming, a bit of belligerence, some berating. It was quite a smorgasbord of aggressive behaviours, really.
It was. Will we get more of the same tonight? It feels like we will because the Prime Minister was out and about today in full ScoMo crazy mode, unzipping his head and spilling the contents out onto the desk.
Yes, we had a really big day in Australian politics. I, for one, was challenged, moved, and maybe a little enlightened by the National Press Club debate involving Barnaby Joyce, where I heard apparently Labor policy is to lower all ceilings and tall people could have their heads cut off.
By ceiling fans, don't ask, really. Just watch the clips. If you go to Van's feed on her Twitter page, you can see about 13 seconds of Barnaby Joyce just taking it to a whole new level.
Yes, a level slightly beneath that of a ceiling fan. I really couldn't work out what was going on. I think the very long campaign duration is having a very predictable effect. Obviously, lots of MPs and candidates are out with coronavirus. It's been very difficult on the road. A big shout out to our friends at Unions New South Wales who are literally on the road outside the debate venue right now, shaking wobble boards at Scott Morrison in a protest for wages to go up.
Well, who knows what he'll say about that tonight because he keeps changing his position on that. Today, it's all going to come crashing down if workers get a fair share of the national wealth in a modest $1 an hour pay rise.
Yes.
So much for his brilliant economy, which he keeps telling us is the envy of the world. But $1 an hour for our least paid workers is going to bring it all crashing down. So.
Yes, apparently we'll be back to the 70s. So crack out those flares, spark up the lava lamp, get the brown suit on.
I'm well ahead of the curve.
That is I was alive in the 70s, Francis. And let me tell you, it was never that neutral. It was the only decade that ever made a concept out of bright brown.
And burnt orange.
Really?
Together.
Yeah, it's a decade best forgotten by the kitchen designers of the world.
Now,
however,
we are going to, of course, take this debate seriously at some point and talk about the big issues. But we want to talk to a range of different people tonight as we lead into the debate and afterwards as well about what is said and what the takeouts are. And we're going to speak to Savannah now. Savannah Benson.
We are going to speak to Savannah Benson. Savannah, are you there, my dear?
Yep. I'm there. Can you see me? Great.
Lovely to see you. Thanks for joining us on this auspicious occasion. Are you just absolutely rippling with ceiling fan height excitement about tonight?
I mean, look, I'm looking forward to the reaction on Twitter and other social media. That's always fun. The actual debate, yeah, not necessarily.
Now, Savannah, that's your domain. You do a lot of work on TikTok and other platforms. What was the reaction to the last debate, what you were seeing on those platforms from people who were engaging?
I think people just, found a lot of the gaffes from Scott Morrison quite funny. There was a lot of reaction to the comment where he said he had never seen any corruption from his side of politics. There were quite a few videos with that snippet constantly going. A lot of also stuff in regards to wages and a lot of negative reaction, a lot of making fun of Scott Morrison. So,
do you think he's going to tone it down tonight? Do you think the reaction was so intense to the last one that we might see a bit of a tactical change, or do you think he's going to go the full Morrison?
Could go either way, I think, but I think going off, his kind of attitudes today, I would be surprised if he tones it down, especially, calling Albanese a loose unit in regards to just wanting a basic minimum wage rise. I think that might give a bit of an indication of what Scott Morrison will be like tonight. So,
The funny thing about using the phrase loose unit, so in my circle of friends, if you are referred to as a loose unit, that means, hey, you're a good time guy.
Really?
You know how to have a good time. I'm hanging.
Are you a bit of a loose unit, Francis?
I cannot confirm nor deny that at times I may have been a loose unit fan.
I'm not going to admit to any looseness in front of the camera, certainly not this close to a green screen. But Savannah, one of the things that we learnt in the last debate, amidst all of the shouting and belligerence, was that Scott Morrison thinks that gig economy workers are actually entrepreneurs. Has this been your generational experience? Is everybody making it like Wall Street?
Yeah, not really. I found, for me, that whole exchange was the most telling part of that whole debate. Another telling moment, I think, for me was also the comment on agriculture workers, where Morrison was like, oh, I'm sure they get paid more than the minimum wage. And meanwhile, it's been likened to indentured labor. You just have to listen to a lot of these workers actually talk about their experience. I found that pretty shocking, personally.
Yes, it was kind of confronting to think the man who's running our country doesn't appear to know anyone who works in the gig economy or the agricultural sector.
The only time he's probably done that is if someone's delivered some food to the lodge.
How lovely.
He would never have even picked up.
The lodge or Kirribilli House.
Yeah, well.
And a big shout out to the people of Cook, where of course my mother lives, who have the great blessing of seeing so little of Scott Morrison because he does spend all of his time at Kirribilli House.
But it is. I mean, this idea that young people are all just an army of Gordon Geckos on bicycles delivering our food on a Friday night is so detached from reality. So I know that you would be hearing a lot from people whose that's their current employment existence, is job to job, hoping to make enough money, grapevining from gig to gig to try to get enough cash together on a weekly basis. So what is being said, it must be so far removed from the reality for so many younger people in Australia.
Yeah, truly. And I think like a lot of the comments on minimum wage, I think are pretty telling, especially for young people who tend to work in, in jobs where you're working minimum wage. And also doesn't really recognize the reality that so many young people aren't even getting the minimum wage that they're supposed to, because wage theft is obviously one of the major issues for young people, and that was just, not mentioned, not considered an important enough issue, whereas almost every young person I know has experienced, wage theft at some point in their life. So, yeah, I think that's pretty telling,
Pretty telling indeed. And of course, the best way to deal with wage theft in your own workplace is to join your union, australianunions.org.au.
You don't say. Join a union? What a fantastic out there idea, Francis. That could really catch on. Imagine if workers organised and demanded their rights collectively. Why? It could cause radical transformation of the entire industrial relations framework.
I'm just unzipping my head and spilling my thoughts out onto the desk.
Well, look, we all love unzipping our heads and letting our thoughts spill.
Yeah. And just before we say goodbye, Samantha, as well, what about the issue of climate change and the fact that it was all but absent from the debate the other night? Seriously, given that for the year that we've had, or the couple of years that we've had in Australia with bushfires and floods and really vivid examples of the consequences of our changing climate, that it hasn't really featured at all in any of the discourse at a top level throughout this campaign so far. But we know that so many people, young people in particular, that's their priority. That's the number one priority in terms of issues that need to be dealt with. Has that been the topic of conversation as well?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think it's something that's, quite frustrating for young people, is that that's such an important issue, and that's going to be an issue that will affect us for years to come. Whereas the media seems to be a lot more interested in doing a culture war on trans issues than actually talking about climate change, which is not just going to affect us badly in the future. It's not just a future thing. You just have to look at what's happening in, Pakistan and India right now with the horrific heat waves that they're having. And we've, had bushfires, we've had flooding this year. Yeah, I think it's something a lot of young people are obviously quite annoyed about, that they're just focused on all these other issues that are just not important.
Francis and I just want to express our solidarity with the community of trans Australians who have been, subjected to the most ridiculous bigotry and prejudice and nonsense and myth making over the past few weeks. It's absolutely appalling. You shouldn't need to have courage just to get through your day, and yet I've watched that community find the courage to just keep going and keep fighting, and it's outrageous, and you have our solidarity.
Absolutely, particularly on the issue of younger people dealing with gender dysphoria and gender issues. The fact that they are already in a moment of crisis in their lives and they're trying to navigate something really difficult with their families, that a Prime Minister is willing to blithely use that as a political tool to try to find a few extra votes in the seats in the outlying suburbs of Western Sydney, speaks to a level of cruelty that it's actually quite gobsmacking that is just passed off so blithely and so lightly by the PM when he just raises these issues as if there are no consequences. And I think that says a lot about the sort of person that we're dealing with. And
yes, a man who probably should keep his head zipped.
Yeah, and I think Australians are smarter than that, so.
Well, it seems to have hugely backfired, this weird persecution campaign of already marginalised young people. I've never really seen making life miserable for children as much of a popular vote winner. I understand the niche politics of the moment can drive campaigns into all sorts of strange places, but this really seems an outlier.
Yeah, it's the last card at the bottom of the deck, at the bottom of the barrel, I think, Van. Savannah?
So, Savvy, what are you hoping to see tonight? What would make your night of this debate?
Well, definitely an actual proper discussion on wage rises and the cost of living, because obviously that's been a big topic today, because I think it's very frustrating that we have a Prime Minister that doesn't really seem to care about increasing wages for so many people who are actually really struggling at the moment. And I really hope Anthony Albanese calls him out on that. And another thing I hope he brings up is the situation today with Fiona Martin getting the two candidates confused. That was pretty shocking. And if we're talking about gaffes, that's a pretty major one. So I hope he gets called out for that one.
I'm sure he will. Hey, Savannah, if people want to find you on the socials quickly, where can they find you?
So I will flag the TikTok account, Young Workers. So it's just at Young Workers on TikTok. We do a lot of political content and a lot of union content as well. So yeah, I would check us out on there.
On you, Savannah. Thanks for being with us now.
Men are on the television,
I know.
Unfortunately. Savannah, you are fantastic and you do great work. Everybody, please check out Savannah's incredible work for young people and young workers on TikTok. We will post contact details later.
And now we'll go to Mark Benson and the team in the ring at Channel 7. Godspeed you all that we survive this debate. And, of course, tweet along with us, #LeadersDebate.
I've got the emoji puppets ready.
Leader will make a 2-minute opening address. They'll see a timer on their camera and you'll see a clock for the final 30 seconds. We won't cut the mics, but the timings are there for each leader to get a fair chance to get their points across. The same thing when we ask our key questions. 2 will come from the West Australian political editor, Lani Scarr. While every seat counts, 6 in WA could decide who wins. But there are marginal seats across the country, and we have selected 25 undecided voters watching on live in every state of Australia and the Northern Territory. They'll deliver their verdict after this decisive debate. To keep track of the leaders' pitches and promises live online, head to 7news.com.au and thewest.com.au. A coin toss was held a short time ago. Anthony Albanese won and chose to go second. So let's begin the opening statements. Scott Morrison, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Mark, and good evening, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us this evening. As we all know, the last few years have been very tough for Australians, and I've never been more proud of my fellow Australians. As a government, we've sought to back in Australians every step of the way through the most difficult time we've seen since the Second World War. Of course, we haven't got everything right, but we've stood there with Australians, and right now, Australia is one of the most successful economies to come out of this pandemic amongst the advanced economies of the world. We know that a strong economy, we've learned again, is just so important to everything that we hope to achieve as a nation. And it will be into the future with the challenges and the uncertainties we face. A strong economy provides that economic shield for jobs, for incomes, for the businesses you run, to keep taxes low and to put downward pressure on the global forces that are pushing up interest rates and cost of living, to guarantee those essential services you rely on, that we've been able to double funding for hospitals and schools and mental health and deal with the challenges of aged care and disabilities and continue to support Medicare, to build the roads, the safer roads and the infrastructure Australia needs to grow, and to fund our defence forces, security services and intelligence services that keep Australians safe. But most of all, it means that you can achieve your aspirations for you and your family. In a stronger economy, you have more opportunity to do that. In a weaker economy, it's harder, and you don't want to risk a weaker economy. We've got big challenges and uncertainties still to face, and Australians have done so well up until now, and we don't want to risk everything that's been put in to ensure we're at this point to seize those opportunities for the future. That's why this election is all about who can manage that economy best, who can manage money, who understands the economy best to ensure that we can have a strong economy for a stronger future for Australia.
Prime Minister, thank you very much. Mr Albanese, your 2-minute opening statement.
Well, thanks very much, Mark. I believe that good government can change people's lives for the better. I believe that good government can help people achieve their dreams and aspirations for a better future for themselves, their families, and in particular the generations to come. I know it because I've lived it. That's my story. Now I want to build a better future and use the power of government to assist Australians as the leader of this country. I want a better future where we deal with the cost of living crisis, where everything is going up except for people's wages. A better future where people, if they need to see a doctor, can see one. Where we strengthen Medicare and we make medicines cheaper. A better future where childcare is more affordable, women can more participate in the economy, and we can build productivity at the same time. A better future where dealing with climate change means taking up the opportunity to grow the economy with renewables and new industries, training people for those jobs with fee-free TAFE and additional university places. And a better future where we deal with the aged care crisis. Older Australians deserve to live in dignity and with respect in their later years. But it's also important how they get there. I want us to bring together big business and unions, to bring together small business and their employees, to bring together the Commonwealth, states and territories to work on our common interest. Australians have conflict fatigue. They want solutions, not arguments. And that's what I want to deliver in delivering a better future, one where no one is held back and no one is left behind.
Mr Albanese, thank you. We'll give each leader 1 minute uninterrupted to answer our questions tonight. Then we'll have time to rebut and debate. Our opening question tonight is on wages. It is the defining issue of the final days of this campaign. Mr Albanese, you said you'd absolutely support a 5.1% pay rise to match inflation, a pay rise that is to the minimum wage.
Yeah.
Today, that's not so clear though. What is your promise?
It is very clear. Well, the Fair Work Commission set wages, but the idea that $1, Scott just spoke about the strength of the economy that he says is there. The idea that those heroes of the pandemic, those low-wage workers, people on the minimum wage, are cleaners. They're people working in the care sector. They're people who work in retail. They're people who help get us through the pandemic. They deserve more than our thanks. They don't deserve a real wage cut. Now, the Fair Work Commission makes a decision independent of government. But what I've said is if they made a decision that there shouldn't be a real wage cut, would I welcome it? Absolutely. Because people are doing it really tough out there. The cost of everything is going up, the cost of food and vegetables and meat, the essentials in life. The idea that after everything we've been through in the pandemic, minimum wage workers would get a real wage cut is something that I don't support.
All right. Mr Morrison, you say a pay rise matching inflation will cripple the economy?
Now, what I say is I support wages obviously going up and welcome the fact that Reserve Bank Governor is saying that those wages are now going up. And the minimum wage, well, it's increased by 7% in real terms over the course of our government. In fact, in 7 of the last 8 years, the minimum wage increase has been higher than inflation. Under the previous Labor government, 3 out of the 6 years they were in government, real wages actually fell for minimum wage earners. And it's not just the minimum wage which is affected by the wage decision of the Fair Work Australia. It's about 2% who are on the minimum wage, but another 23% of the Australian workforce is impacted by that decision through some 120 awards. And you know, small business, in the submission that the government made to the Fair Work Commission, we don't tell them what to do, but we inform them about what's going on in the economy. And small businesses are doing it incredibly tough. They're the ones who employ people, and we want to ensure that they can keep employing people. And by having a sensible approach to wages policy, they can employ people and pay them better wages.
All right, Mr Albanese, you said you would welcome a pay rise in line with inflation if that's what the Fair Work Commission decided. What would you advocate for, though?
We're advocating publicly that people not get left behind. That's what we've been doing this in...
Is there a number, though? Is it inflation?
No.
Is it
no.
underlying inflation plus productivity?
No.
What is it?
What we have said throughout this campaign is that we don't want people to be left behind, that people are doing it tough, and that those people who are on minimum wages, if the increase is less than the inflation rate, then what that means is they'll be getting a real wage cut. And they deserve better than that. The Fair Work Commission does make those decisions independently, but we've made that very clear.
Yeah, OK, very clear. Can we make this very clear? Yesterday you were asked, would you support 5.1%, which is at the moment the rate of inflation? And you said absolutely.
That's right, and if the Fair Work Commission makes that decision, we would absolutely welcome it. Because real workers out there are doing it tough, and those people on the minimum wage, it's not like they're making decisions based upon what holiday they'll have. What they're making decisions on is whether they'll buy a steak or just have to stick to mincemeat for their families. There are real pressures out there on people, and we need to recognise that people have gone backwards. Real wages went backwards in the last 12 months. But for people on the minimum wage, they're doing it really tough right now.
Mr Morrison, what sort of pay rise do workers deserve?
The Fair Work Commission is the right place to do that. And the reason that is because the economy needs stability and it needs certainty, particularly with the many things that are pressuring down on the economy today. I'd welcome pay rises, obviously, for all workers, not just those on the minimum wages. But we need to have an economy that's strong into the future. And if you have wages that rise at 5.1%, which is exactly what Mr Albanese said yesterday, that means that can feed into inflation, which pushes up interest rates and pushes up the cost of living even more. We can't have a situation where someone may get a wage rise, but then gets it all taken back in higher interest rates and higher costs of living. That's why we think the most sensible way is to look at all of the evidence, not to just run off at the mouth and just come up with things on the run, but to consider these sorts of economic questions very carefully. You've got to understand how the economy works. And if you just say 5.1% and try to jawbone the Fair Work Commission, then that puts Australia's economy at great risk, and we can't afford that sort of lack of understanding about how our economy works.
All right, Prime Minister. So, Mr Albanese, the Prime Minister makes the point, if wages go up in line with inflation or greater, you put in additional pressure on interest rates and inflation and prices and mortgages.
What the Reserve Bank says and what economists say is that in order to have non-inflationary wage increases, they shouldn't be more than inflation plus productivity.
Underlying inflation.
Inflation plus productivity.
Not headline inflation. Not 5.1, 3.5.
And what we're talking about here, is people on minimum wages. It's $20.33 an hour. What we're talking about here, if the Fair Work Commission grant a 5% increase, that's 2 cups of coffee a day. And the idea that 2 cups of coffee a day is something that would damage the economy is, I believe, just not the case. We need to look after people who are vulnerable. We need to do more than say, thanks very much for everything you did in the pandemic, but now we're going to cut your wages.
Very quickly, Prime Minister, Mr Albanese is saying $1 an hour additional for people on $20 an hour. It seems pretty reasonable.
Well, if Mr Albanese thinks small businesses around the country can have a 5% increase in their wages bill on top of all the other things they're facing and see their ability to come through, then people won't be worrying about what their wages are. They'll be worrying about whether they have a job. You know, you just can't be loose with the economy with things like this. You've got to be understanding all the moving parts, and there are more moving parts in our economy than ever before with the pressures on global pressures for rising interest rates and inflation.
Okay.
And a 5%,
But basically
0.1%
his
increase,
policy
which the
about
Leader of the
know your
Opposition
place
has
worker.
advocated.
Yes,
You
know
may be
your
trying to
place.
walk
Know
it
your
back now.
place.
That would push up inflation and it would push up interest rates.
All right, let's move on with the question.
Can I just make one further point
Quickly.
that Scott can respond to, perhaps? You have failed on a number of occasions that we've asked in the Parliament and again in a previous debate to say that every worker should get even the minimum wage. Is that still your position?
But my position is that employees should get the minimum wage. That's exactly the case.
You've said before that it's complicated.
Employees.
You've refused to back it in.
I'm talking about employees. You're talking about people who choose to be in small business. And
No,
I'll tell you
I'm not.
what, small business...
I'm talking
people
about
who-
workers. I'm
people,
talking about
people
workers,
who run
Scott.
small businesses, Anthony, they don't get guaranteed anything. They risk their businesses and their own incomes in their houses every single day, and they need the support to help employ Australians.
All right, let's get back to some structure, gentlemen. The cost of living has meant the great Australian dream is becoming more out of reach, and it just got a lot harder with interest rates on the rise. Who or what is responsible, and can either of you guarantee your economic plan will bring rates back under control, Mr Morrison?
Well, the best way to keep downward pressure on rising interest rates, and we know that interest rates have risen 25 basis points. Now, they've gone up 125 basis points in New Zealand. They've gone up 75 in the UK, 90 in the UK, 75 in the United States and Canada. And so we're seeing this all around the world, and Australia has been performing better. But to keep downward pressure on interest rates, you've got to keep downward pressure on inflation as well. And that's why being able to manage money means we've been able to secure our AAA credit rating, one of only 9 countries in the world to do so. And we've done that through the middle of a pandemic where the economic impacts have been 30 times worse than what occurred in the global financial crisis just over a decade ago. And we've got employment outcomes that are 50% better. That's what a good economic plan looks like. That's what good economic management looks like. And in a strong economy, you can be more confident about your ability. Now, we know that Australians through the pandemic have been taking good decisions. They've switched to fixed interest rates. They've got ahead of their mortgage. As a government, we've been showing the same responsibility.
OK, Mr Albanese, how will you put downward pressure on interest rates?
Well, the first thing to say is that Australia achieved the AAA credit rating under the government that I was a part of and a senior minister on, and we've kept it since, and that's a good thing. The way that you can grow the economy without putting upward pressure on inflation and interest rates, the key is productivity. And that's why we've prioritised productivity-boosting measures as part of our economic plan, whether it's childcare that will boost workforce participation and boost productivity in the workplace, whether it be our infrastructure investments where we'll prioritise projects that boost the economy rather than pork barrelling, including supporting the national broadband network, whether it be making more things here in Australia, or our plan on energy and climate change. It's about seizing the opportunity for investing in renewable energy. Our plan will see $52 billion of investment that will reduce power prices for businesses and also for households.
Mr Morrison, Mr Albanese just made the point about productivity. Fairly insipid in the recent years, around 1%, just below, just above. Why has it been so low? And what can you do to increase productivity in the next 3 years?
The most important things we can do to boost productivity is invest in the skills of Australians. This year, about $7.8 billion has been invested in giving young Australians and people all throughout the workforce, giving them better skills to make sure they can make an even stronger contribution in their workplace. We've also invested almost $3.5 billion in our digital strategy, which is helping small businesses and businesses right across the economy be able to upgrade their businesses and do more online and make them part of the new economy into the future. We've also invested heavily in issues like cybersecurity, which will be critical to businesses into the future. Another important part of what we're doing has been investing in that infrastructure. Western Sydney Airport under our government is a reality. Under Labor, it was just a promise that never happened.
Western Sydney Airport.
Under our government, we're building that infrastructure, $120 billion worth, whether it's the Melbourne All Port Rail, the Western Sydney Airport here in Sydney, the Inland Rail,
and where did that money
which is
go,
going
Van?
to carry the freight that Australia needs to get things out of this country, into port and into those markets we're expanding.
Mr Albanese, will that increase productivity?
Well, what we're dealing with here is some comeback from the massive cuts that occurred in skills and in infrastructure under this government. We've seen infrastructure prioritised based upon colour-coded spreadsheets, not based upon productivity. We've seen Infrastructure Australia sidelined. We, of course, know that productivity went backwards in consecutive quarters before the pandemic, and at that time the government doubled the deficit before the pandemic. And we will, if we're successful in the election, inherit $1 trillion of debt. There's nothing productive about doubling the debt before the pandemic that occurred. We'll prioritise skills, infrastructure, good energy policy, good childcare policy and women's workforce participation in order to make sure we put that downward pressure on inflation and interest rates.
OK, let's bring it back for our viewers. What they're hearing you say regularly is everything's going up except your wages. Families are cash poor, they're stretched on mortgages. What can you do to increase the cash position of families?
Well, right now, we've had a $100 billion turnaround in the budget in the last 12 months. And we turned that budget round by the time we hit the pandemic. Mr Albanese talks about those years before the pandemic. It took us 6 years to clean up the fiscal mess from the previous government. We got the budget back into balance, and then we put in place the single biggest economic intervention in the form of JobKeeper, which I now can say saved more than 800,000 jobs. Now we're doing it again.
Oh, yes. And
because as Australia comes out of this
JobKeeper?
pandemic, we didn't want them to get hit down by the rising cost of living caused by the war in Europe and the issues in China and the floods that we've seen pushing up fruit and vegetable prices. So we cut fuel tax in half, $250 to pensioners and others on fixed incomes from the government, and increased tax relief from the 1st of July, where families up to $126,000 a year will get an extra $420 that they'll keep of money they earn. But the tax cuts we've provided continue into the future because they should keep more of what they earn, and we've always delivered lower taxes.
All right, Prime Minister, thank you. You are smashing out those talking points. There's something. Mr Albanese, what are you going to do to ensure that families can make ends meet? That's the basic requirement.
Well, the truth is that people are just doing it really tough out there. Our measures on childcare, for example, will make it take away the incentive. How crazy is it? In 2022, that some women, if they want to work a fourth or a fifth day, it costs their family money. Everyone knows out there that when your youngest child goes into kindergarten, all of a sudden families are better off. That makes no sense. That makes no sense. It's a disincentive to work and to participate in the workforce that really penalises families for having children. We need to do much better. Our energy policy will reduce electricity prices by $275 for households by 2025. We'll have cheaper medicines, lowering the cost to $30. These are all practical steps that we will make. But as for the Prime Minister's position, the fact is the debt had doubled before the pandemic, and the other fact is he speaks about the one-off payments. Yes, they're happening. We supported them because we know people are struggling. And now during an election campaign, he says that giving the lowest paid workers $1 extra an hour is somehow disastrous.
We've had that,
and that contradiction between the two positions is, I think, really stark.
Can I get a commitment from both of you? We've had that debate. Can I get a commitment from both of you that families won't have to pay to see sport on their televisions?
Well, we've both got a review after the election, but Mark,
no.
I know we have been...
A review?
Yeah,
That's not a commitment.
We're both committed to review, but Mark, can I...
Committed to review?
No,
Mark, can I come back to the point we just made?
From the owners of Channel 7 to
and that is, Mr Albanese is making a lot of promises. He talks about childcare. That costs $63 billion over 10 years. We hear him talk about a lot of things he's going to do.
It's not right.
But what we haven't heard is how he's going to pay for them. During this election campaign, he has not submitted one policy for costing, not one. And all of these things sound
not
good,
right.
but you've got to be able to pay for them, and the only way you can pay for them is with a strong economy.
That's not right.
Let's give you a chance to rebut that.
Our childcare policy cost is $5.4 billion over the forward estimates, which is less than the $5.5 billion. Less than the $5.5 billion that you spent on submarines that just ended up with a torn-up contract. The waste that you have done.
You don't support the submarine contract.
This is the most... You don't either. You tore it up with the French.
No, the one we're doing with the Americans or the British.
We do support that, and you know that.
Well,
all right.
Doesn't sound like it.
Mr. Morrison.
It's the French contract you tore up.
Yes,
it cost
and we were right
taxpayers
to do that.
$5.5 billion and produced nothing. This is the most wasteful government in Australia's history. Waste and rorts is something that has characterised this government because it treats taxpayers' money like it's Liberal
We will
Party
get on
money.
that, but we've got to move on. Character. Our next question. Mr Morrison, you've called Mr Albanese the most dangerous Labor leader since Gough Whitlam, and that might be unkind to Gough Whitlam. Can you justify that, please?
Well, we saw it yesterday, and we saw it again today. This is a Labor leader who comes from the far left of the party and has been very loose. He's a loose unit when it comes to the economy. He makes things up as he goes along. The policies he comes up with, he doesn't think through. He's got a housing policy where if you get a wage rise, you've got to sell your house. He's got a health policy that he hasn't been able to cost. He says it's costing, but it's not costing. He's got an NDIS policy that he isn't able to explain. Now, we've seen over the course of this election campaign, one of the most fundamental things you need to know about as a Prime Minister is unemployment. He couldn't even tell you what the unemployment rate was, let alone the cash rate. Understanding the economy, particularly at a time like this, you can't risk it with someone who just simply has not had the experience in the serious financial jobs of government. No Labor leader in the past, when he's been in the shadow ministry or the ministry, has ever trusted him with a financial job. I wouldn't let him near the till either.
OK, I'll give you a minute to rebut that, Mr Albanese.
Well, I will lead the most experienced incoming Labor government in our history. I've served as Deputy Prime Minister, I've served as a Senior Minister, Infrastructure Minister, Communications, Regional Development across a range of portfolios for 6 years and been Government Leader in the House of Representatives, where I presided over the entire parliamentary program during that period. I make this point as well. I have acted as Prime Minister on a couple of short occasions. When
Scott Morrison's been acting as Prime Minister for 3 years.
Kevin Rudd and Gough Whitlam became Labor Prime Ministers. None of them had served as ministers in a government. I have an experienced team. We are ready for government. And all we see from this government that is now seeking a fourth term in office. They don't have an agenda for today, let alone an agenda for the next term. All they have is abuse and scare campaigns and fear campaigns, no policies for the future. We can do better than that.
All right, Mr Albanese, you accuse the Prime Minister of not turning up, not taking responsibility, always blaming someone else. Can you justify that, please?
This Prime Minister has that as a characteristic. We saw it with the bushfires, where he rejected the idea that there was any connection with climate change of these events, where he didn't turn up, and when he did turn up, he turned up with an ad with a donate to Liberal Party button in the corner during that bushfire crisis. We saw similarly with the floods, a failure to act early enough and then partisan decisions based upon where support would go. We saw it, importantly, with the failure to order vaccines early enough. Just like he said it wasn't, he didn't hold a hose in the bushfires, in the pandemic. He said that it wasn't a race to get vaccines. It was. It was. It was a critical race for Australia, and as a result, the health and economic impacts were worse. And the same thing happened with the ordering of rapid antigen tests that simply weren't available. And whenever this Prime Minister is confronted with any challenges, he blames the states, blames someone else consistently. OK,
that's a minute. And so, Prime Minister, I'll give you a minute to rebut those allegations.
Well, for the past 3 years, Mr Albanese's been an armchair critic. He's like that person on Monday morning who always says what should have happened on the weekend. And you know what? You never let that person run the team. He's always wise in hindsight. He's always got criticisms to make. And that's been his job for the last 3 years. So why is it we're 10 days out and we still don't know what his economic plan is? We still don't know how he would run the economy. He still didn't know 3 weeks ago what the unemployment rate was, let alone what the cash rate was. And so what we're dealing with here is a leader of the Labor Party who's great on criticism, he's great at pointing at problems, but he doesn't have solutions for them, and even more importantly, he doesn't know how to pay for them. Because in government, you've got to know how to do this stuff. In government, you've got to know how the economy works. You've got to have the strength to make those decisions, and yeah, you don't get them all right. And I don't say that I ever have got them all right, but what I can say is we've come out of this pandemic with 400,000 more people in work than we had before the pandemic, one of the lowest death rates in the world, and one of the highest vaccination rates in the world, and we achieved that offer of vaccines within about 2 weeks of our immediate target.
All right, Prime Minister. OK, that's your minute. Mr Morrison, you've said if Mr Albanese is elected, the boat people will come again. The boats will come again. Justify that.
In August of 2008, the Rudd government abolished temporary protection visas. That was one of the key planks of the border protection regime that the Howard government had in place. That was the mark at which the boats started. Now, we all know what happened after that. 800 boats, 1,200 people dead, 50,000 people turning up, causing chaos. Now, we've fixed that with 3 clear policies. Turn the boats back where it's safe to do so, offshore processing and temporary protection visas. Mr Albanese has said that if he's elected, he will abolish temporary protection visas. That means permanent visas for people who have come on a boat. They have learnt nothing in the last decade. I know how to keep them stopped because I know how to stop them. I know what the policy is because I designed it and I made sure it worked. Mr Albanese wants to weaken it. OK, Mr Morrison. So, Mr Albanese?
The key to keeping our borders strong are the elements of the plan that would turn back boats, which we support, offshore processing, which we support, and settlement in third countries, which we support. Anyone who comes by boat will not get any visa here in Australia. They won't be allowed to settle here in Australia. We had the same position on all of those issues. What this government did say consistently just before the election was that if people were removed from the hotels that they were in Melbourne, then that would lead to chaos and the borders all being reopened again. They said if we did the deal with New Zealand that's been on the table for such a long period of time, then that would have the same result. The truth is that they changed their position just before the election on those issues. The truth is that where we see a good idea, we will support it. And that stands in stark contrast with this government and its approach. The previous answer where Scott spoke about the JobKeeper program, we were arguing for wage subsidies and the Prime Minister said that it was a dangerous idea at that point in time.
OK, we're not going back there. Prime Minister, the difference in the policies, as I see between you two gentlemen, is that the Labor Party wants to get rid of temporary protection visas. What effect will that have?
If you change the visa status of those who have come to Australia by boat, and there are many here right now, that sends a clear message. I know that because I had to experience dealing with that problem. When Mr Albanese, for the brief time he was on the National Security Committee, was there, they said they would not turn boats back. And they attacked the government. They attacked me. They said we shouldn't do it. And all I can say to Australians is this: do you trust the people who have always believed in it, or do you trust someone who was for it and against it, for it and against it? Mr Albanese has been a complete weather vane on border protection. He was vehemently opposed to it. He said he couldn't ask someone to do something that he couldn't do himself. And so I just don't believe he's got the stomach for it if he were to become Prime Minister.
You know what we need in this country, Mark? We need leadership that is prepared to accept a good idea and accept something that is working when it clearly is. And the truth is that boat turnbacks have worked. I've said we support it. We clearly are sending that message. None of those policies will change under a Labor government.
Mark, can I make one more point on that?
Sure.
Because when you do this, and Mr Albanese wouldn't know this because he hasn't done it, he doesn't know all the circumstances you're faced with when you're implementing this policy. And so he can't speak with any great knowledge about what he'd be confronted with or the many members of his National Security Committee. Tanya Plibersek could be on there, any number of others. What I know is my team know how to do it, have done it, we know what to expect, and we know how to do it.
All right, I'll give to Mr Albanese. I'll make this one observation, though, Prime Minister. No one knows how to do something before they get in the position of power to do it, correct?
Well,
you didn't have any responsibility for immigration before you got into the role, Mr Albanese.
Well, that's just an argument for no change, which is consistent with what this election is about. Consistent with the government that is saying, just give us 3 more years of the same. 3 more years of the same cost of living pressures, 3 more years of not acting on climate change, 3 more years of the same viewing of everything through a political frame rather than through the national interest frame. I believe Australia can do better. I believe we must do better.
Okay. Another question. Almost 30% of voters say they'll support independents or minor parties in this election, a record high. What have you done to drive voters away from the major parties, Mr Albanese?
There's a great deal of disillusionment out there with the major parties. One of the things that occurred was the revolving door of leadership had an impact on both sides and led to disillusionment. But also the level of corrupt practices that we've seen in recent times has led to that as well. That's one of the reasons why we need a strong national anti-corruption commission. We need to restore faith in politics. I think overwhelmingly the people who are putting themselves forward at this election, regardless of what party or independence they're from, do it for all the right reasons. But the truth is there's a lack of faith out there when people see a block of land that was worth $3 million that $30 million was paying for. When people see North Sydney Pool that was paid for out of a regional fund. They see sports rights, commuter car parks where there's no train stations, for goodness sake, and then the program's cancelled. We need to do better than that. We need to restore faith in politics.
All right, we will get to those issues too. So, Prime Minister, the independents are threatening your members in several seats, including your Treasurer. What's gone wrong?
The last 3 years, last 2 years in particular, have been incredibly tough. And I think that has greatly disrupted our society and our community. And I think people are still feeling the effects of that. And we all wish it wasn't like it has been when it comes to the many challenges we've had to face, but they have come from well outside our country. And as a result, I think politics has been affected by all of that. But one thing doesn't change as we go into this election. And whether you're in those seats where there are many independents running or you're not, the question still remains the same, because the challenges that we face are very real. And who can best run that economy, who best understands that economy, that is what will impact on your life and the ambitions you have for you and your family. And so I say to those who are thinking about independence, Australia doesn't need a weak government. It doesn't need a weak government that has to negotiate for its existence every single day. It needs a strong government like we have been over the last 3 years, where we could make the strong decisions to get Australia through this difficult time. A vote for the independents may be well-meaning, but it'd be a vote to weaken our parliament and weaken Australia.
OK, so, Mr Albanese, you raised the point of integrity. Let's go to a couple of issues here. Mr Morrison, don't taxpayers have a right to know why they've paid $500,000 compensation to your Education Minister, Alan Tudge's press secretary and former lover, if he apparently did nothing wrong? Haven't taxpayers got a right to know why they've paid $500,000 in this?
Well, first of all, this matter, I'm advised, has not even been settled. And that's because these are matters that go to very private interactions between people, and they are handled sensitively. Well, we had an independent inquiry into Alan Tudge's...
What do you think, though, your Prime Minister, what do you think, though, about your minister in this circumstance? Did he do nothing wrong?
Well, that's why I held an independent inquiry into his conduct and his behaviour.
I'm sorry, Prime Minister, but you don't need an independent inquiry to say there's a power imbalance in that relationship, do you?
Well, I understand those points, but that's why it's such a serious issue and it should have been investigated. When I was confronted with issues of allegations of behaviour against my members, I called an independent inquiry. When Mr Albanese was confronted by the bullying of the late Senator Hitching, he chose to do nothing. Yeah. Now, I had the inquiry. We got the findings from an esteemed retired public servant who looked at this issue and found that there was nothing to base any finding against Mr Tudge.
And you're happy with that?
Well,
there was nothing wrong with that. So as
that's
Prime
why we
Minister,
haven't.
you're happy with that?
Of course, people who have relationships in the office, that's not something I've never approved of. And we have a strong ministerial code of conduct which has been put in place subsequent to those events, which was done by my predecessor, which I support. And so I had an independent inquiry. We dealt with the issue. And on the other matter of the financial settlement, well, I'm advised that the matter hasn't even been settled.
All right, Mr Albanese, your view on this, should taxpayers know why they're paying this money?
Well, I think that we need some transparency here, and I note that the person involved here has said that she is happy for there to be public disclosure. I don't know any of the facts of the matter, so I can't comment any further. But I do think that it's quite extraordinary that we're in an election campaign. Alan Tudge is, I think, still the Education Minister. It's not clear to me, Prime Minister,
Well, Stuart Robert is the acting Education Minister.
But who's the Education Minister?
Mr Tudge has stood aside from that role for personal reasons. Like, as you'd be aware, ministers, as do shadow ministers, stand aside from their responsibilities.
So he's not a minister.
He hasn't. Well, he still has a warrant as a minister. He has not resigned as a minister.
A minister without
and nor
portfolio.
has he been dismissed. Yeah, that's a fair way to describe it.
So, I mean, I just think the idea that we don't know who the Education Minister, Alan Tudge...
It will be Alan Tudge.
It will be Alan
Alan
Tudge.
has advised
After
that
the
he
election,
would, yes, he would be happy to come
cleared.
back and serve in the ministry, and I welcome that.
Well, people have been looking for him during this campaign.
What
He
should the
hasn't
Defence
been
Minister
seen.
be?
Can I ask,
Under your government?
gentlemen, Mr Albanese, what action would you take as Prime Minister if this was one of your ministers?
I would make sure, one, that there was transparency. I think quite clearly some of the details of this are of a personal nature. I think that is, we need to separate personal behaviour from political behaviour, but we also need to recognise inappropriate behaviour as well. I do think that there are better guidelines have been put in place.
That's a very good point. Do you then recognise wrong behaviour in your own party? Now let's go to the case of Senator Kimberley Kitching.
Yeah.
You've said that there are processes there within the Labor Party to deal with these matters.
Yes.
If a member of your caucus were to now register a formal complaint about the treatment of the former Senator Kimberley Kitching, would you investigate?
Well, that would be dealt with through the independent processes.
Would that spark an investigation through those processes?
Yes, it would.
So
yes,
one member complains, there would be an investigation?
Yes, it would. That's the structure that we have in place. That's the structure that was established in 2018 by Bill Shorten and then strengthened with the involvement of the entire caucus, led by Sharon Clayton, the chair of our caucus, and which people participated in.
And so we can assume no one has done that at this point. Mr Morrison?
Well, I find it amazing. In my case, there was a press conference held by Ms Miller. I didn't wait for anybody to write to me or do anything like that. We moved and established an independent inquiry to get to the bottom of it. I thought that was the most important thing, to establish confidence regarding the ministerial standards. They were upheld, and I acted swiftly. I find it disappointing that the serious allegations that were made about the bullying of the late Senator Kitching...
What would you have done, Prime Minister, if it was in your party?
Well, I've just told you what I would have done. Yeah. I've just done it. When I was presented with a sensitive issue like that, I called an independent inquiry.
OK, we need to get to the bottom of it.
Ms Miller didn't give evidence.
Well, she chose not to participate.
She chose not to participate. So, gentlemen...
That's her right.
Gentlemen,
I respect
isn't
that.
the point here, all this, isn't the point here that we need an independent integrity commission to deal with these matters, to take them out of the hands of politicians?
I agree. That's why I have 347 pages of legislation to establish...
But no bill in the Parliament. You didn't put a bill through the Parliament.
I agree with that. But I'm one step ahead of the Labor Party, who've been talking about this for 3 years.
But this is the opposition. And government, when will you bring your bill?
You're the government, mate. You're the one that's supposed to present the legislation.
And when will you bring your bill for an integrity commission
create,
If we can
institute,
ensure that our bill can
and
be passed, then I'm
design-
very happy to bring it forward.
What
But
about
Mark,
bringing-
that has always been my
This
case.
is an
But let me
argument.
talk about the bill that I have. Because the bill has powers of search, it has powers compelling
Yeah, we know
witnesses,
that. I'm
it
sorry,
has
Prime Minister,
powers
we
of
do know
royal
the detail,
commission.
and it's on your website.
No, it's
we do
important.
know it. We know. I know it is important,
and it's funded.
And no, I don't want to be harsh here, but we do know that, and there's been a long debate about it. The crucial point, though, is at what point does the Parliament get to decide on this issue? Isn't politics the art of the achievable?
I agree with that,
You
Mark.
hear arguments from both sides,
Yeah.
and you come to a consensus in the middle somewhere, and you have an agreement.
Well, I hope we can do that, Mark, but a body of this nature is important, and you've got to get the design right, and it can't be driven by the whims of politics. It needs to be developed by good design where the rule of law applies. It applies to criminal conduct, and we don't see a situation where we have agencies that can go and convict people before they've even heard the case in the media. That is not a good way to run a country. That is not a good way to uphold integrity. I think it only undermines the process.
All right,
Mark,
Mr Albanese, I'll get you a chance.
We do need to clean up politics, and we need a national anti-corruption commission, and one with teeth. Under the model put forward by Mr Morrison, what it would be ministers would decide, have a decision to make whether something was referred to an anti-corruption commission. It needs to be independent of politics. That's the whole point of an independent national anti-corruption commission. And the idea that somehow the opposition's responsible for the government not even introducing legislation, that taken to its logical conclusion, why would you vote for Scott Morrison on Saturday week? Because what he says is, unless the opposition support legislation, it won't even come before the Parliament.
Okay, so Scott Morrison will
he
get
knows how to manage an economy, and he's not loose with economics.
You'll both get a chance to put your pitches to the people on why they should vote for you at the end of the program. Thank you so much for the engagement. It's interesting and it's reasonably polite. So thank you for that. We'll just take a breather now, but after the break, the question that could stump them both, and key questions from the West, as our undecided voters around the country prepare to decide who won the final showdown, live across the 7 network.
So there we are, half-time, maybe it's half-time, the break, the ad break, the cash cow time for Channel 7 of this debate.
Not in this broadcast.
Not at all.
Where you just get us. And we hope you're enjoying our beautiful emoji puppets, which are, of course, our signature contribution to political discourse in this country. For those of you watching us who may have just joined, this is Francis Leach, not Chris Kenny. I am Van Badham, not Peter Credlin. And if you'd like to join our discussion, we are tweeting to the Leaders Debate hashtag on Twitter. We also have a fantastic curated list of awesome people who we like, basically, who are tweeting along at a Leaders Debate list, which is at the top of my Twitter feed at Van Badham. You can find it there.
So the big takeaway so far, Van, still the Prime Minister cannot bring himself to commit wholly to raising the minimum wage for our lowest paid workers by $1 an hour. Just can't do it.
No, can't
Won't do it. And
doesn't want to do it. It has not occurred to the Prime Minister that the best thing that could happen to small business in this country is the economic activity of more customers, which you tend to get if they have more disposable income. If you raise wages for those at the lower end of the income spectrum, they spend more money on the kind of things that small businesses provide. I'm amazed that we pretend that this is not a thing.
Well, we know that the lowest paid workers who are on the minimum wage spend the majority of their wages do go back into the economy simply by needs must, because they need to pay their way day to day. So the idea that wage rise will not once again generate more economic activity is just a furphy. I mean, it is, as you said, an economic driver in and of itself.
Where do people think the money to buy things comes from? It comes from wages. If you increase wages...
You don't have a magic money tree?
I don't have a magic money... I mean, I would like one. That would be handy. But knowing me, I'd just give it all to the marginalised and the oppressed. I'm not going to spend money on it. But, I mean, so that's one of our takeaways. I'd like to point out, I've been keeping score. Anthony Albanese has mentioned climate change, that, persistent existential threat to humanity, 4 times. Francis, how many times has the Prime Minister acknowledged the reality of climate change? A big fat 0. So his mind is clearly not on that particular subject, which is interesting. He wants to talk about the economy. I'd like to ask, What kind of participation do you get in the economy if your house is burnt down or your town has been washed away in a flood? Worth considering, Francis.
Indeed, it is. The other thing was the ICAC discussion at the end there. Thought Albanese did really well to land it back on the plate of the Prime Minister, saying, well, if you're only going to pass legislation that's agreed to by us, the Labor Party, and other opposition parties, why be in government at all? I mean, it is one of the slipperiest things that we've seen by this government over the 3 years is the attempt to try to put it back on Labor, that despite its promise prior to the 2019 election that this government was going to present legislation on an independent federal ICAC, that it hasn't done so simply because its legislation was so weak and so self-interested, it didn't have the support of the Labor Party, so they didn't bother at all. Well, classic Morrison, whatever it is, it's always someone else's fault, even when he doesn't do his own work.
It's always someone else's fault. And the ICAC issue is huge in the community because we've seen the waste. We saw the amount of JobKeeper that went to Jerry Harvey, a man who does not need that kind of help. We've seen all of these grants go out to distilleries in Tasmania and defence contractors who dubbed their shipped-in foreign guest workers through wage theft, and money given out to companies that have former Howard government cabinet ministers as their chairs, like constantly, or money given out to companies that are offshoring a third of their local workforce to Vietnam. And again, you know, the people are really angry, and Albo is right. Trust in government is low because we've seen the graft and the corruption, the car porks, the sports rorts, and there needs to be an independent commission to which everyone is scrutinised.
Let's go back to the coverage now, and we'll rejoin the team at Channel 7 and continue to emote in our best possible way with you and online at #LetUsDebate.
Political editor Lani Scar for the next questions. Lani.
Elections are about the future. People watching tonight want to know who is giving us a better future. Right now, children face incredible levels of debt that the government won't pay off for decades to come. WA is the only state that's posted a surplus over the past year, driven by mining, mostly through the pandemic. To pay off debt, will you both categorically rule out a carbon or mining tax to reduce that debt burden?
Prime Minister.
Never have, never will have a mining or a carbon tax. Under our government, our taxes will always be lower because right now, if you're earning $90,000 at home there today, you are paying $50 a week less in tax every single week because of the tax cuts we've already legislated and delivered. And there's more to follow in the next term, where between $45,000 and $200,000, you will pay no more than 30 cents in the dollar. We are the party of lower taxes. We've always delivered lower taxes. And one of the reasons WA was able to achieve that surplus was the GST deal, that we're able to ensure that WA got their fair share of the GST. As Treasurer and as Prime Minister, I fought for it, I delivered it, and Western Australia has got the benefit of that, their fair share, because it was in the national interest.
Mr Albanese?
The answer to your questions is yes, we will certainly rule them out and have done so. But when it talks about Western Australia and the success of Western Australia, one of the things that I'll be doing is working with Mark McGowan. Scott Morrison, when he had a choice between Mark McGowan and Clive Palmer, he chose Clive Palmer. He went to court as part of with the Solicitor General, spent taxpayers' money backing up Clive Palmer's legal case to open up WA's borders. Now, WA has been successful under Mark McGowan because they've made tough decisions, which has helped to boost not just the WA economy, but our entire national economy.
Mr Albanese, most economists do believe pricing carbon is the most effective way to reduce emissions. You are going to this election with a strong mandate on climate change. If you're saying no carbon tax or no price on carbon, how are you going to achieve net zero by 2050?
Well, we've got a better system. What we have is we're using the Abbott government system that it created, the safeguard mechanism, but also what we have is a plan to fix transmission. What that's about is making sure that renewables can plug into the grid. At the moment, that's one of the weaknesses. That will stabilise the grid. We also have a plan for electric vehicles. At the last campaign, Scott Morrison said that electric vehicles would end the weekend. We want to encourage the take-up by reducing taxes on electric vehicles is what we will do.
And Mr Morrison, you also want to achieve, you said you're going to achieve net zero by 2050. How are you going to do that, and why are most economists wrong if they say a price on carbon is the right way to go?
We're investing $22 billion to develop the technology that Australia and in fact the world needs to address the challenge of climate change. Our plan is about technology, not taxes. It's about not mandates, but giving people choices about how to achieve this and to have reliable, affordable energy in our system to ensure that we can make the transition over a long period of time. Anthony talks about the safeguard mechanism, which he says he's borrowing from us. What he's doing is lowering the threshold, which means a carbon credit scheme which will put additional prices on mines, on oil, on gas, on petroleum, on transport and cement production. That's what he won't tell you. He also won't tell you by investing $20 billion in the transmission network, which adds another $50 billion from the private sector, that has to be recovered from you, the electricity consumer, and that will put up electricity prices by $560 a year.
Prime Minister, you've called that a sneaky carbon tax, carbon tax by stealth. Is that really the truth, though?
Yeah,
and
it is.
Mr Albanese, how do you respond to that?
Well, Lani, there he goes again. He says that he supports net zero by 2050 and then comes up with all the reasons why nothing should happen. The truth is, this government have had 22 different energy policies and haven't landed one of them. And business is so far ahead of the government with its strategies. That's why our policy will end the climate wars. It's been supported by the Business Council of Australia, the Australian Industry Group, by the National Farmers Federation, the Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry and the ACTU. We need to move on from this debate. Climate change is real and it's here now. We see it with the bushfires, we see it with the floods. We need to make sure that we actually harness the energy that business has for this change to make sure that we take advantage of the opportunities which are there. Australia can be a renewable energy superpower for the world if we seize this opportunity.
Can I give you an example? Down in Gilmore, in the electorate of Gilmore, in Narra, Manildra, we've provided an $85 million loan through the Clean Energy Finance Corporation to ensure that they can transform how they do their production of their important ethanol production there, which supports so many jobs. That's how you do it. You invest in the businesses to make the change. You don't tax them more with a carbon credit scheme which taxes their operations.
Mr Albanese, you were at Manildra
the point is
a couple of weeks ago.
Scott, exactly. I visited Manildra a number of times and I was there during this campaign. And the truth is, what they are doing is taking the opportunity that's there to lower their emissions because it lowers prices. That is what is driving the change through. That's why, for example, renewables are the cheapest form of new energy. That is a fact. And the new opportunities which are there, which are driving through. But Scott spoke about the Clean Energy Finance Corporation. That was created by the Labor government, of which I was a minister, and this government tried to abolish it.
We kept it, and it's funding Manildra to reduce their emissions in a regional area which is saving jobs and enable them to produce into the future.
OK, gentlemen, we get you disagree on that. Lani, let's move to the next question.
We do have another very important question on women. Women are getting a stronger voice, particularly in this election campaign. Looking forward, they want certainty, security and equality, especially in the workplace. Free childcare happened during the pandemic. You've both spoken about it tonight. Why can't free childcare continue? Mr Albanese first. What
we want to do is we have a plan for more affordable childcare where 96% of families will be better off and 4% will be the same. We've also said that what we will do is to have the Productivity Commission in our first term look towards whether you would move to a universal system of affordable childcare. What are the economic implications of that? Why do we do cheaper childcare? It's not welfare, it's economic reform. It will boost productivity, it will help business, it will also help women's retirement incomes, but that's just one element that we have. We also want to make gender pay equity an objective of the Fair Work Act. We want to make sure that we deliver on safe workplaces as well, which is why we'll adopt all 55 recommendations of the Jenkins Review into safety in the workplace, including the obligations on employers to do what they can to make every workplace safe.
Okay, that's your minute.
Mr Morrison.
Well, thank you. I mean, when you look at the results, this is an incredibly important issue. The gender pay gap has fallen from 17.4% under Labor to 13.8% where it is now, and it even went down to 13.4%. What does that mean? It means women today, because of the closing of the gender pay gap under our government, are $70 a week better off. There's 1.1 million more women in work since we came to government. Female participation in the workforce has been at record levels as a result of the strong economic policies that has been providing opportunities for women to get into the workforce. And we've been championing women's entrepreneurship. And we've been championing women in non-traditional trades and skills. So many more women taking up jobs in the Western Australian mining industry, but also up in Queensland. I've met them down at Snowy Hydro. I've met them in the manufacturing industries. I've met them taking up these jobs and getting them the skills. We've got $3.8 billion invested in the skills of our country, providing record numbers of apprenticeships right now, and women are taking up more and more of those jobs.
Mr Morrison, it has been reported that an MP in your party room suggested that childcare and women accessing childcare was outsourcing parenting. Do you agree? And is this an issue you ever talked to Jenny about?
No, it's not something I agree with. And we talk about childcare and many issues all the time. Our children themselves obviously went through childcare, and we went through that with other parents and their families. We have a responsible and affordable policy on childcare. What we don't do is go and promise the world when you know you can't pay for it. If you go to 90% childcare for everybody, that is a policy that all Australians are going to have to pay for. What we've demonstrated is we've been getting women into work because they want to work and they want those opportunities, and a strong economy is what provides for it. It's fine to make big promises, but you've got to be able to pay for them. And when you can pay for them, fair enough. But we haven't seen one policy costed by the Labor opposition during this campaign.
You've made that point several times.
Mr Albanese, you have said that you want a productivity commission review into this issue. There's already been a productivity commission review into this issue. Why do we need another one?
Because you need to, when we move to more affordable childcare, they'll be able to see what's happening in practice as well, what the implications are. Where Scott, I think, is wrong on this issue is to see it as just a cost. What it is an investment. It's an investment in women, it's an investment in families, it's an investment in our economy, because it will grow. All of the analysis shows that every time you spend $1 on childcare, more than $2 comes back through economic growth, through increased workforce participation, through increased productivity. Australia has fallen to 70th in the world for women's economic participation and opportunity. We can do better than that. We can do so much better than that. We do very well on education for women, but that isn't translating into those full-time permanent career jobs and those career paths. And it's also having a significant income whereby women are whereby women are retiring with up to 40% or more less retirement incomes than men.
So if it's so important, will you commit to free childcare then? Why can't it be brought into line with the school system?
Because what we're doing is putting forward very clear costed policies. Our policy is costed on childcare. It is $5.4 billion across the forward estimates. It's an investment. It is less than the waste that has gone on in this government,
right,
far less.
We have to move on, Lani. Thank you very much. We'll see you shortly again with Michael Usher, who will reveal the debate winner according to our voters in pubs within marginal seats around the country. We're going to hear your closing statements in a moment, gentlemen. This is where we want a positive answer. We've heard lots of negatives, and we get that you don't like each other. However, surely everybody has one redeeming feature, don't they? What is the one strength, Mr Prime Minister, that you find in this gentleman that you admire but also worries you?
Well, the thing about Anthony that I've always admired is that he's never forgot where he's come from. And he grew up in Housing Commission, and I have no doubt that the other day on Mother's Day is always probably the toughest day of each year that is for him. And he's shown the ability to rise to be the leader of one of the oldest parties in this country. And he should be commended for that. He's shown a great deal of determination over that period of time to rise from very humble beginnings. And I admire that in Australians, and I admire that in Anthony.
Good boy.
And that's
Well
great.
done, you.
But, you know,
You've
to
come
do
a
this
long
job,
way, Anthony.
You need
Well
to
done,
know
you.
your stuff.
Yeah,
You need to be across the detail. You need
Wonderful.
to not make
He even
things
put
up
his
on
own
the
tie
run.
on tonight.
And you,
Look at
and you
that.
can't be loose on the economy, because too many Australians' livelihoods
let the
depend
peasants
it. And as much
do
as
the
I
economy.
respect what he's been
No,
able to achieve,
especially not when there's
I just
been
don't
deputy
believe
prime
that he's
minister
been able
having
to
economic
demonstrate
degree from
that
Sydney
he's
Uni.
able to get across the detail to do this job.
Yeah, that's what we call a compliment sandwich.
He was
Top to the
trying.
top, soft
He
at the
was
bottom.
trying there.
He gave it a bit of a crack, I'd say. But now you.
He was trying there.
Yep.
Well, the job of Prime Minister is one that is obviously a difficult one to do. Scott's absolutely committed to his nation, and I admire that. And on a range of issues, to name one, mental health. In terms of young people, we've seen increased funding for mental health, but in particular, increased funding for Headspace and for those issues. Mental health is something that, when we were all a bit younger, just wasn't spoken about. It's a good thing that it's being spoken about. It's a good thing that the Prime Minister speaks about it as well.
There you go. You can be positive and you can like each other.
No, I had no barbs. So, yeah.
I thought you wanted one of each when you asked me.
right.
I must have misunderstood the question.
Oh, thank you for that. Let's move to the final statements. We'll start with you, Mr. Morris.
Well, thank you, Mark, and thank you everyone for joining us here this evening for this debate, and thank you, Mark and Anthony. There are great opportunities ahead, Australia, and I'm really excited about them. Over the last couple of years, we've come through the most difficult times that we could have ever imagined and couldn't have contemplated 3 years ago. But here we are. We've stuck together. As a government, we've backed you in. And this is one of the big differences, I think, in what we've heard tonight. See, in the Liberals and Nationals, we believe in you. We want to back you in. We believe a strong economy is based on you. We don't believe the government is the answer. We believe you are the answer. And that's what our policies are designed to do. That's why we believe a strong economy is the best way to enable you to fulfil your aspirations for you and your family, to shield you against the pressures that are going to come in the years ahead on our economy, putting upward pressure on interest rates and the cost of living, to shield that job, to shield that income and that business and that retirement saving that you have. It's also going to guarantee those essential services so we can tackle the big problems in aged care. $19.1 billion to support our response to the Aged Care Royal Commission that I called. These are tough challenges. Continuing to support Medicare at record levels, bulk billing at 88.8%. It's up from 82.2% when we first came to government. To ensure we keep building those roads and infrastructure that keep you safer and get you home safe and on time to be with your family or to get to work, and to ensure that we continue to invest in our defence forces as we go forward in our security and intelligence agencies. This election is a choice. It's a choice about who can manage and deliver that strong economy, because that's what your future depends on. And now is not a time to risk that on an unproven opposition and Labor leader who don't have a plan for our economy and haven't got the experience with the challenges that we face. A vote for the Liberals and Nationals on May 21 is the strong, responsible and safe choice for a strong economy, for a stronger future.
Prime Minister, thank you very much. Mr Albanese, your closing statement.
I have a plan for a better future, a plan to make sure we can grow the economy in a sustainable way by investing in infrastructure, by investing in climate policy, by making sure that no one is left behind and no one is held back. We can do better. We have a range of challenges facing us as a nation. We have childcare costs that are spiralling, that stop women working that fourth or fifth day. We can do better than that. We've had 22 attempts at climate policy, and we have issues of floods and bushfires. We've seen the impact. We can do better than just continuing to drift there. We have pressure where so many people can't see a doctor when they need one. We can do better than that. We have young Australians who can't get the skills and training that they need for the jobs of the future, and we can do better than that. This election is a choice. It's a choice over whether we seize the opportunities which are before us. We have a government that's asking for 3 more years of more of the same. They don't really have a plan or a policy for the future because they struggle with the present. And that's why at this election we've got constructive plans and processes in place that we're putting forward to the Australian people. If we don't elect a new government. We'll miss out on the opportunity to increase women's economic participation through cheaper childcare. We'll miss out on the opportunity to end the climate wars. We'll miss out on the opportunity to deal with cost of living and stop everything going up except for people's wages. If we can't even get consensus here about a $1 increase for the minimum wage, then I think that this country isn't able to go forward. I firmly believe that we have a great future, but in order to do that, we need a better government.
Thank you. Gentlemen, thank you very much for a spirited and very civil exchange, which I hope helped our viewers make their decision which way they'll vote on May 21. And thank you too for your commitment to the country, both of you, and what you do. It's a big sacrifice. We need someone to lead the country on May 21. The best to both of you.
Thank you, Mark, and to Seven for hosting.
Thank you,
very
Mark.
much.
Thank you, Seven.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, everyone, for watching.
That's the final showdown between our prospective Prime Ministers ahead of next week's election. Now, to find out if it swayed our undecided voters taking part in our pub test, let's go to Michael Usher. Michael.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, leaders. Great final showdown there, and a few positives to end on as well. Soon, I'll be joined by Australia's leading political commentators for full analysis. But first, we invited around 150 voters to pubs in marginal seats right around Australia, in every state plus the Northern Territory. Now, they've been watching the debate. There's some of them live. They're right now casting their votes on which our on-site scrutiny is. They're going to be counting. That's a shot at Tasmania, the seat of Bass there, one of the marginal seats. Let's take a look at the Victorian seat of Chisholm right now. That ballot box that you can see on the desk there.
They're having a good old time there,
That's the Notting Hill Hotel. Across the country. These are
Looks like a hostage situation.
It'll be really interesting to see which way they saw
Link
the
twice
debate
and
go.
you want to be let free from
How to
them.
cast
Watch
their
that
ballot
for
right now.
Bucky.
Three times
We're going
for
to reveal those
Mandurah.
results within minutes.
That's not really
while
what
that
I
voting
would
is
call
underway, let's
getting
get a
down.
sense of how some of our pub test participants
I know, I'm just
are
going to
feeling
say
after that
if
final
you
showdown. We're going to
want
begin
responsible
in the Sydney
government,
seat of Macquarie.
elected the national parties, and I was like, but I
Now
saw
the Richmond
National
Club,
Press
that's
Club
where we...
Scott,
Wow.
hosted by your Deputy Prime Minister Barnaby Joyce.
Oh, wow.
And with there was a nosebleed. There was active blood on the face of the DPM. And all I could think was, I am so glad this country doesn't have nuclear weapons. I will do everything I can to protest the nuclear subs.
Give me an idea. What's been the reaction
Barnaby
during
Joyce
our...
as Deputy Prime Minister, Scott Morrison as Prime Minister, Peter Dutton as Defence Minister. You can't risk it.
Is Barnaby Joyce going to find a landscaping place called Four Seasons Landscaping and hold a press conference out the front of that anytime soon? Because he's heading down Rudy territory.
Yeah, it's literally a matter of time. Rudy had the drippling dye.
Sure, somewhere in Fishwick in Canberra you could find
you can
a
find
hardware
Fishwick,
store next to a porn store.
Shout out to our friends
Hello,
in Canberra.
Fishwick.
Hello.
I haven't shaken off that reputation from when we, as young people, used to go and buy pornography from Fishwick and our fireworks.
It was a place where the scavenger hunts did end up. You really could buy anything there back in the day. We may be showing our age.
We are.
That was kind of extraordinary. I'd also like to shout out the man or woman who was pointing the tranquilizer gun at the Prime Minister over the course of the debate in order to keep the belligerents in line. We saw some scraps of it. We saw it coming out.
He just couldn't even do at the very end just a simple homily to why Anthony Albanese was a person of decent character and virtue. It had to be patronising. It had to be put down.
Yes, it was. I mean, it is just so amazing that the pause sometimes teach themselves to read was the tone that I got there. As an entirely 100% state school educated person myself, oh my, Francis, oh my, oh my, oh my.
Haven't you done well?
Haven't I? Incredible. It's amazing. I did this button up myself and I'm keeping it together. This is a family show. We hope you're enjoying it.
Now,
Have you been on the Twitter feed?
Yes, well, get on the Twitter feed. So hashtag Leaders Debate. You can go to Van's Twitter page as well.
Van Bad
and
Ham.
have a look at the list that's been set up there for you to follow and see what some of our friends and comrades are talking about. But we've got a bunch of interesting people to dissect the smorgasbord, the charcuterie that was This
It wasn't
this
charcuterie.
leader's debate.
Thin slices of meat on display this evening. It was quite fascinating. I thought Albanese was actually stronger in this debate than he was in the last one. I thought that he didn't take the bait. You could see Morrison getting ready to go the full belligerence, and Albanese was avoiding it, which I think takes, a saintly patience. And yeah, so I think he was stronger and he was more on message.
So let's join now with three friends of the Australian Union Movement. Of course, one of them is the Assistant National Secretary, Liam O'Brien, who was with us on the last Leaders' Debate for our post-debate conversation. Liam's with us. Who else have we got with us as well?
We have the Acting Secretary of Victorian Trades Hall Council, the amazing TikTok influencer Will Strack.
Hey, Will.
Wonderful, incredible person. And we have the fantastic Emma Dawson, who is, of course, the Executive Director of Per Capita.
And we have Will's magnificent pooch.
And we have a pooch. Who is this, Will?
This is Harry. He enjoyed the debate enormously.
Harry is an instant winner. Harry, thank you for joining us as well. Let's start with you, Will. What was your main takeout from that exchange that occurred this evening?
Look, I was just super excited that we talked about early childhood education. And I have never been so pumped. I ran around the lounge room doing the big fist pump when I heard the phrase, "It is an investment, not a cost." For me, line of the night.
Now, Emma, the work that you would do at Per Capita involves looking at the relationship of industrial policy and economic policy to what's traditionally been looked at as like welfare or social service policy. How do you feel about the contrasting visions of particularly early childhood education that were offered in the debate tonight?
It's a no-brainer, and like Will, that was the line of the night for me. I've been banging on about that for years now. This is an investment, right? It's an investment in kids, it's an investment in women, it's an investment in society. And really the Prime Minister just doesn't get it. I think not only is Labor's policy heaps better now, but the fact that they're going to ask the Productivity Commission to look at moving to universal childcare is an absolute game changer.
Well, Liam, do you think that's got real cut through in this last sort of 10, 12 days of the election?
Oh, absolutely. And contrast it with what the Prime Minister said with regards to childcare. Essentially, women can work as much as they want to only when the nation is prepared to pay for it. It's just such a contrast compared to, as Will and Emma pointed out, I mean, these are massive productivity boosts. And we have really low participation rates amongst women, and that's because, rightly or wrongly, much of the child care responsibilities fall on women. It's a huge barrier to re-entering the workforce. It has massive implications, not just on their wages at that time, but as we know, their retirement incomes as well. So it's a significant productivity boost, but it's just fucking right.
Yeah.
It is interesting, though, that in these three debates, we've had such little discussion about education. I'm old enough to remember when education was seen as a massive policy suite for government. And apart from a little bit of discussion about skills tonight, which was fascinating to hear Scott Morrison praising his record on skills, because as far as I was aware, there's a skill shortage in this country, which means small business in particular is being obliged to import guest workers from overseas to meet basic skills demands, because we're not training those people. But it's some limited discussion about early childhood education. I'm interested in why the discussion has moved away from education. Is it because Scott Morrison's government has done so little, there's really nothing to talk about?
It might have something to do with the fact that Scott Morrison's government can't present an education minister for any public discourse whatsoever when it comes to the election campaign. I mean, it is outrageous that this government's able to get away with essentially saying that Alan Tudge will be the education minister, as if it's just a simple fact.
When he comes out of witness protection, yeah.
There are serious policy issues in relation to education in this country, and we talked about the investment that's needed in terms of childcare, but also in terms of skills more broadly. I mean, there is significant work to be done in education, and this government's completely missing.
Not only that, they've actually sent education backwards in this country. They deliberately cut public universities out of JobKeeper. They have slashed funding for research and development, and they have raised the fees for the most popular degrees that are done by women. They are antagonistic to education. They're lifting the amount of money that goes to private schools. They won't meet the Gonski requirements for public schools.
Yeah.
They won't even fund 3-year-old kinder nationally. They're hostile to education, and it's a key plank of social mobility, right? It's a key thing that we do, not only to build our economy, but to build people's opportunity and allow them to build themselves a better life. Any government that is interested in supporting education isn't interested in supporting its people.
Will, do you think that Anthony Albanese landed the lines when it came to the importance of that rise in the minimum wage?
Oh, I think so. I mean, you know, we just need to keep reminding everyone that people are people are struggling, right? There's a record number of people who are doing multiple jobs right now. People have fallen further and further behind, and it's just not good enough to say, I mean, what was Morrison saying? I totally support an increase to wages, but I totally don't support an increase that would mean that people would just even stay level with where costs of living are, let alone get ahead. I mean, why would it be enough that people just stay with costs of yeah, I think that's right. And that's absolutely the way that we should be talking about this.
It was interesting that Scott Morrison said so much about his own, grasp of the economy, and we need a strong economy. By the way, everybody, in public relations, we call what Scott Morrison was doing tonight a message box. That's where you constantly repeat the same frame in order to associate those qualities with you. So strong economy, we heard it a million times. And yet Scott Morrison doesn't seem to have a grasp on how inflation or wages work in relation to productivity. Emma, I will bring you in. What's missing from Scott Morrison's understanding of the fundamental principles of economics when it comes to wages?
Economic literacy, basically. The fact is that Scott Morrison is perfectly happy to see high-income earners get a massive tax cut next year, right? He doesn't think that's going to be inflationary, but he actually is arguing against a real cost of living increase for wages to just remain level pegging with the cost of increase. He's going to an election saying he thinks that working people should go backwards in their standards of living. Now, we know a minimum wage worker, if they get about a 5.5% pay increase, which is what the ACTU is arguing for, what Albanese has said he supports, it's only just going to keep up with the cost of living inflation. That's less than $2,000 a year for a minimum wage worker. Someone on 200 grand is going to get $9,000 a year out of a tax cut next year. So you can't have it both ways, mate. Now, the other thing about wages is wage growth at the minimum wage level for low-paid workers is not inflationary as long as we have productivity growth. And I'll give you a red-hot tip here. There has been nothing wrong with labour productivity in this country for the last 10 years. Labour productivity is fine. That means that we're working, we're doing our bit to grow the economy. It's business and government that's letting us down by not investing in the economy and in productivity. That's why wages are sluggish, because business is hoarding all the profits and not sharing it with their workers. Those workers deserve a pay rise that will allow them not to go backwards, and they will then spend that money into the economy. This nonsense about small businesses can't afford it, right? Small businesses can't afford not to do it because it's the people that spend money in small businesses that are the same workers that are going to get the pay rise. It's big business hoarding profits that's the problem here.
And we talk about message frames, Van, Emma, Will and Liam, and one that is starkly clear to me is Morrison uses the one about fear, and it's one that resonated the last election. If you ask for a pay rise, you'll lose your job. Now, this is the party that claims to be the party of aspiration. But what it is telling people who aspire to be able to just pay their bills, if you dare consider asking for a pay rise, you pay with your job. That's what they offer the lowest paid workers as their option. Liam, I think we're pretty soon going to go and find out what the pub test is.
What the pub says. Definitely want to hear what the pub says. I think there's some questions about how pubs might get selected.
I've just had a message saying that they're still lining up at the pub to work out how the test will work. So, I mean, that gives us
essentially Australian that we've determined that the winner will be chosen by drunk people.
Yes. Yeah. As a non-drinker myself, I feel strangely
disenfranchised.
I can get through this debate.
But I've got to say, I felt that way since the Liberals got elected in 2013.
But just on the minimum wage.
when we last spoke to you at the previous debate, and Scott Morrison had that clangor of a line where he was asked if he supported minimum wage, and he said, it depends. Obviously, that provoked somewhat of a strong reaction from people. Certainly, Savannah, who we were speaking to before the broadcast today, mentioned that as a huge issue for young people. Do you think there was an attempt by Morrison to walk that back a bit tonight?
Well, he was definitely chastened from that experience such that he was not prepared to equivocate on the minimum wage. So no doubt he's, read the writing on the wall. But I think, to Emma's point about the minimum wage, he's read the writing on the wall in relation to wage theft. He doesn't want to go anywhere near that barnacle that he has completely failed as a government to deal with, has threatened with his omnibus bill that would essentially knock out stronger wage theft laws in some states. So he doesn't want to go near that. But just to Emma's point, let's get the numbers right here. 24% increase in CEO pay in the last year, 13% increase in profits, but a minimum wage worker asks for $1 an hour and it's economic Armageddon. I think he takes us for mugs when it comes to this. I honestly think, this is a frame that is not favourable for the government and something that I think most Australians rightly turn around and go, minimum wage workers, cleaners, aged care workers, these are the people that got us through the last 2 years. And the way we're going to repay them is, well, look, if we don't want to threaten the recovery, you need to take a real wage cut. I just don't think Australians are up for that.
Well, you've been at the front line of the social media conversation as a TikTok celebrity. How have you seen reactions to the changing economic discourse of this election now that Scott Morrison has made these sort of public admissions about minimum wage and about how he's not concerned about wages going backwards, and yet, strangely enough, it is unwilling to do anything about massive tax cuts for the richest people in society. How is this being talked about out in the broader community?
Look, I think it's really, I'm glad that Albo talked about this thing around productivity, that inflation isn't the automatic, when wages go up, you don't automatically get inflation, because I think there is, that is a perception out there that, of course, if wages go up, then prices must automatically go up, rather than understanding it's a much more complicated picture than that. So I reckon I'm glad that Albo talked about that, because certainly when if I do something on the socials around people needing wage rises, there's always the people that come in, and it's a genuine question where they say, but doesn't wage rises mean automatically that inflation will go up and we'll end up in some kind of terrible spiral? So that's and I think Scott Morrison's picked up on that, right? That's why he hammered that thing constantly about that's what's automatically going to happen, even though it's totally not true that is the case. And in fact, he was telling an untruth around that. That was a lie.
What were some of Morrison's other magnificent clangers? I'm obviously still recovering from Sunday night's I've Never Seen Corruption in the Liberal Party, which was extraordinary, really. What were some of the other great moments of Morrisonianism that we saw tonight? Panel, Emma, what did you see?
Claimed that the gender pay gap had gone down on his watch without admitting it's because men's wages have fallen, right? It's not because women's wages have gone up. It's great, the gender pay gap's come down. Yeah, because everyone's wages have been stagnant for 9 years, and we've lost quite a lot of jobs in the mining sector, which paid very high wages for men. Any researcher in this field will tell you that's the reason the gender pay gap's shrunk slightly. He has no record to stand on when it comes to women's economic security. We have dropped precipitously in the world rankings. We're now at 70th in the world for women's economic participation in this country, and yet we're equal first for women's education. So it's not women that are doing the wrong thing, it's the government letting them down.
Oh, Emma, let's not discount women's entrepreneurship.
Oh, of course, no.
Women's entrepreneurship.
They've done a lot.
This is, of course, how they're going to fix the gender pay gap, is that women are all going to set up small businesses. entrepreneurship.
Sham contracting arrangements, which we were told was
Correct.
entrepreneurship a few days ago. Yes,
Yeah.
I feel very much like an entrepreneur whenever I, desperately hope for an invoice to be paid. All those weekends that I work consistently.
There was every gig economy care worker in the country as well who's working 3 different shifts as a sole trader because they can't be employed anymore and they're working through labour hire. This is not the kind of outcome that workers want.
No.
And further to that, I mean, aged care didn't get the prominence in this debate that it probably should have. I think that was one of the disappointing aspects of this debate more generally. But at the heart of that issue is the workforce crisis that has seen aged care become such a tragedy for so many people, so many families, so many residents and workers as well, who've had to endure the most extraordinary burden in the last couple of years in the lowest paid jobs in the country. Liam, as someone who knows a lot about this as well, and Emma, and how do we make sure that in the last 10 days this issue has the prominence it deserves? Because it is a crisis that won't go away by ignoring it.
Yeah, well, look, I'd reflect on Sunday's debate where he, talk about clangers, called himself the person that blew the whistle on aged care and the toweling up that followed from that. I mean, I think if you did watch the coverage that the network on Sunday had of the various groups that were watching it, like the pasting that he copped for his response on aged care was enough to mean that he'd never utter the words again in a debate. It is something that is a real shame when it comes to this government. It is appalling the way in which older Australians have been treated and the workers who care for them, especially through the pandemic. If we think about, this time last year, where we were being promised that, frontline workers would be first in the queue to get vaccinated, and it took him, the better part of last year to get those workers and the residents that they care for vaccinated. It is an appalling record this government has on aged care. And, I agree with you, Francis, this needs to be front and centre for the last 10 days because it's got to be a big achievement of an incoming Labor government.
I've got to say, it's interesting too. Morrison is as revealing in what he doesn't want to talk about as what he does want to talk about. And of course, one of the biggest issues in the electorate is the NDIS. We know that it affects 4.5 million people. It is an absolutely massive area of government expenditure. We know that there are huge problems with its delivery. Sham contracting is rife. There's labour exploitation, poor standards, all of these things, and families that are denied their rightful entitlements, who end up having to defend their entitlements in front of the Administrative Appeals Tribunal, also known as, the happy pasture land of former Liberal MPs. Why doesn't Scott Morrison want to talk about the NDIS?
Oh, because it's not going that well at the moment. Because I don't know that I can speak about this without swearing. I'm holding a lot.
Let's send you one of these, Will. You need one of these.
Yeah. Look, I think the NDIS, we need to make major changes to it. It's been unravelled and undone. The system needs work, and it's clear this government has absolutely no commitment. Like Scott Morrison has no commitment to ensuring that people with disabilities in our community are supported. And that's why he doesn't want to talk about it, because, to be frank, he does not care at all.
I find it completely amazing. Like, he wants to use the NDIS as a stick to beat Anthony Albanese with, because Anthony Albanese couldn't remember all 6 points of a 6-point plan off the cuff at a press conference the other day. And yet Morrison himself is not putting forward any proactive vision.
He doesn't have any 6 points to remember, right? He doesn't have a plan to remember. All he has is a tax on the NDIS, is instructions to staff at the agency to reduce costs by limiting people's support, reversing support that people have had in the past. This is a world-leading social infrastructure program. It was when it was designed. And we did some research recently at per capita that found for every dollar we spend, we invest, every dollar we invest in the NDIS, we get a $2.25 return to the economy. That beats spending on defence by 40%. It is not just the right thing to do, it's an economically smart thing to do, and it's a hugely beneficial program in terms of the other costs that it reduces in terms of acute healthcare costs and people re-entering the workforce. And holding back on the NDIS, penny pinching and scrimping and making kids go without the support they need while showering business with $40 billion in JobKeeper and giving tax cuts to high income earners is obscene. That's why he doesn't want to talk about it, because he knows most Australians, if he told the truth, would find that reprehensible.
Well,
So as we go into the last week or so of the campaign, we're all here. We all know what we believe and what we want to see happen. What are the conversations we need to have with those people who are disengaged? There's still a lot of people who have got to vote who are disengaged with this or disillusioned with the process. And we have a job really to prosecute our case. So I'd go to you, Liam. What's the best way to approach this with those disillusioned and disengaged voters?
Well, look, you're right, Francis. Less than a week and a half to go. And if the last election taught us anything, it's, you run as hard as you can to the line and you have every conversation that you can between now and next Saturday. I think the key issue that we should be talking to people about is the debate that, the issue that we opened this debate up with, which is about cost of living and wages. Everybody that we speak to is talking about wages. We have one government that has spent the better part of the last 8 years suppressing wages in this country. And we have seen the devastating effects of it. We've seen, as Emma talked about, workers have lost out in terms of productivity for the last decade. We released a report 2 weeks ago that showed that the average worker has lost close to $4,000 just in productivity losses, let alone the real wage cost losses that they're going to face under this government if they're re-elected for the next 3 years. So I think the most important issue we should be talking about is cost of living. And there are two sides to that. Prices are going up, but if we do not get wages going up at the same pace, then that's a real wage cut for people. And to the point about inflation, essentially, Scott Morrison's argument's kind of like, don't feed the starving man because he might get fat. It is disgraceful. People are literally, living week to week, and it's all about those people sacrificing for our economic recovery. It's both illogical, as Emma said, doesn't meet with any sort of economic rationale, and it's just straight out unfair.
Okay, so at that point, I think we're going to go back to the 7 coverage now because they're about to reveal the winner of the pub test. So, Will, thank you, and Harry, thank you, Harry. You've been
He's
star
here,
performer.
just resting.
Oh, good on you, Harry. So you should be. Emma, thank you as well. Liam, thank you for being part of our analysis of tonight's debate. Let's do it again soon over some other issue.
3 years.
Brian, Dawson, Will Strachey there. Let's go back to the 7 coverage now as we get closer to. I hope they're not going to do a Brownlow medal style. They go 1 vote. Anthony
I don't know,
Albanese.
Francis, because I'm
2
getting
votes.
the reports about the pub test, and I've got to say they're not entirely coherent.
Well, they were in the
which
pub.
might be because they're doing it in a pub, which I don't necessarily think. And hey, rein me in if I'm wild here. Is a place for sober reflection and judgment. Is probably not where I put that particular analysis.
What I love about the pub test is that there are a lot of people out there who we know and love who do a lot of stuff, psephologists, who do a lot of deep diving on stats and figures and trend lines and all the demographics of an electorate. But Channel 7 have gone for a bunch of people with a couple of screws.
But to be fair, look, this could be the most accurate reflection of the electorate we've seen. This is a fun-loving country. But if we could tune in just for a little bit of the 7 commentary and work out if we're going to have a interminable vote.
We've gone back to the highlights package of the debate like it was a grand final. Does anyone really know? Let's hear what some of the commentators have got to say. I think 7.
Well, I think loose unit is the Prime Minister's new favourite phrase. He's used it a couple of times in the last 24 hours. And he went there again tonight. I think it goes to the character question, because the Prime Minister has to walk a fine line of really demolishing Anthony Albanese's credentials as a prospective Prime Minister and not coming off looking like a bit of a nasty pasty, which was some of the complaints that we had from people at the pub. And for me, the favourite standout moment was when he was asked to say something nice about Anthony Albanese. He started recounting his little log cabin story. There were tears forming in my eyes, but then he quickly pivoted to basically saying that he was a flaming idiot.
He did. It was a quick pivot as well. All right, Simon, which talking point do you believe will have had, I guess, the most impact on voters' decisions? I think the comments from our pubs tonight have been interesting. People really are watching this. They want to be convinced of something.
That's right, Michael. The reaction from the punters in the pub so far, at least,
he
incredibly
called those
substantive.
punters
Speaking as a
instantly
card-carrying,
marked out for being
PhD-holding political scientist, well done, Australia, tonight out there in pub land. Look, the clock is ticking down on this campaign. This event is called the Final Showdown. Morrison, to use a footy metaphor, is playing the man, not the ball at this stage. That said, I do want to congratulate Seven tonight on what is actually a very substantive exchange. The first part of the debate, before we got to the character part, Australia does have a choice. Today, the minimum wage and cost of living stuff really came into the fore on the campaign trail, but that filtered through powerfully in tonight's debate, where you heard two in the opening statements and the closing statements. You heard very different visions about the role of government in society, about the government taking a big stick to a big problem, wages not keeping up with inflation. And so I think that was exactly, what Australia needs from an election campaign. I think we got a little bit of that tonight before we then got onto the character stuff and into some of the other matters.
All right, Ben, I'm going to bring in you from Western Australia now. And as I bring you in, I've just got some of those first results in. Hasluck in Western Australia, our poll there tonight is dead even. They've given it straight down the line to Morrison and Albanese with a bit of undecided there. Ben, so what did you see? A really interesting result there from Hasluck, and that's an important seat, one of the seats that I mentioned at the start of this show that Jason Clare said Labor needed to get over the line, but the voters there, still jury out. Ben, what do you think? Were you satisfied with the answers you heard tonight?
Well, it was quite clear that Scott Morrison was going full attack dog on the idea that he was the only man that can manage the economy. At one point, I thought he was almost going to say, you want me on that wall, you need me on that wall. He was channeling Jack Nicholson a little bit. The reality is, though, the Prime Minister doesn't create economic blueprints by himself, and Anthony Albanese won't do that. He's not going to be up in the lodge with no one around him except his crayons and his pad drawing up economic policy. So Scott's going to be a bit careful with this idea that he's the only person in Australia that can lead us out of the pandemic.
Well, now, debate over the Integrity Commission, that was raised tonight, which is interesting, one of the more heated parts of the evening. Let's first have a look at how that unfolded.
I find it disappointing that the serious allegations that were made about the bullying of the late Senator Kitching...
What would you have done, Prime Minister, if it was in your party?
Well, I've just told you what I would have done. Yeah. I've just done it. When I was presented with a sensitive issue like that, I called an independent inquiry.
OK, we need to get...
Ms Miller didn't give evidence.
Well, she chose not to participate.
She didn't trust it as an independent inquiry.
Right.
Gentlemen, isn't the point here, all this, isn't the point here that we need an independent integrity commission to deal with these matters, to take them out of the hands of politicians?
Well, I agree. That's why I have 347 pages of legislation to establish
but no bill in the Parliament. You didn't put a bill to the Parliament.
I agree with that. But I'm one step ahead of the Labor Party, who've been talking about this for 3 years.
Opposition.
But you're the government. You're the one supposed to be delivering legislation to be passed.
Why are they so afraid of an independent commission?
Did either of them really
because they've been spending a lot of time visiting it?
Well, this is the thing,
Maybe.
Francis. Like,
I think
you and I are from the same generation where we grew up with Liberal Party governments constantly arguing for things like surveillance cameras and drug dogs and, constantly...
Royal Commissions into unions.
Royal Commissions into unions and constantly with this argument that, if you've done nothing wrong, if you've got nothing to hide, there's nothing wrong with scrutiny. And this is what we were constantly told, as they gradually eroded the capacity of Sydney to be a fun place to live. And yet, an independent commission against corruption is mooted and they're running miles from it.
They
It's
are.
almost as if their positions are somewhat inconsistent if they apply to themselves.
You know what? At this point, I think we can take a wrap on this because the pub test could be forever. And do we really care?
We found out that there are some numbers coming through. Hasluck is basically dead even, 44-44 with 12 undecided. I'm still unconvinced that a pub offering drinks is necessarily the best place to get people's focus and attention.
Yep.
But, it's a country of diversity and magnificence. So that's something that we'll probably just have to take on board.
Our final message to everyone viewing is thank you for being here. AustralianUnions.org.au to join your union. That's the best way you can promote safety, good wages and conditions in your workplace. And don't forget also over the next week and a bit, Van, have those conversations with people in your life who are undecided or disillusioned with politics. If you're here at this point of this particular broadcast, you know the issues, you know them well, and every conversation is a chance to change your vote.
We'd like to thank all of our amazing panellists, Savannah Benson, Will Strack, Emma Dawson and Liam O'Brien. Obviously, we'd like to thank our crew around us in ACTU Studios, which is certainly the best place to do a broadcast like this.
Yeah, so Kim and Victoria and Ben, who's been with us tonight, Peter McGrath and Atosha, who've been part of setting this all up, Alex White, everyone involved. If I've forgotten anyone, I apologise. I don't think so. But
Adrienne.
Yes, Adri as well, thank you. And thank you, Van.
You can hear more from Francis on his podcast with Sally Rugg, On the Job, which is all about working people in Australia. And you can obviously hear more from me, because I never stop talking, with my beautiful partner, Ben Davison, on our podcast, The Week on Wednesday.
Which is also on a Sunday.
Yay!
And a Wednesday as well. But thank you for viewing, and we'll see you on the other side.